this edition of Silicon Grapevine. My guest today is Wiren Perera, President and COO of InnoPhase IoT. Wiren, hello, how are you?
Hi, Nitin. Good to meet you, and thanks for having me on the show.
Good. Well, Wiren, you've been in the role with InnoPhase IoT just a short while. Just tell us a little bit about how you landed there and also what you're doing at InnoPhase IoT.
Sure. So I was actually chatting with the founder of InnoPhase IoT, who had some discussions with me previously regarding investment and so on. Anyway, in a nutshell, at partway through that conversation, he said, Warren, you could be a very good advisor to our company. And that's how it all started. One thing led to another. InnoPhase originally was one company, InnoPhase Incorporated, and significant technology development, but applicable in two different areas, very different, one being 5G cellular and working with base station customers and so on. And then there was this IoT portfolio, and what transpired then was, speaking with him and the investors, was that they were going to separate this out as a separate company, and eventually the question was, would you like to come and help us run it? And
that was 2023 or?
That was started in 22, in fact.
Okay.
And then we separated out with all of the technology that was available there. Obviously, we've significantly improved on that subsequently. When we separated out, we were probably 35, 40 people. Over the past sort of 18 months, we've now grown to about 120 people. As part of the separation out, we had a round of financing. We've closed some strategic deals, and I think established ourselves as a recognized player in sort of wireless, battery-powered, wire-free solutions for IoT.
Right, and I think that's headquartered in Silicon Valley, and you've got sort of locations around the world.
Yes, we do. We are here in San Jose in the Bay Area. The founding team was actually in San Diego, still remains there, so that's a big center for us. We also have teams in Bangalore, in India, in Sweden, and also in China. Small teams that have started. Yeah.
Before we get to tell me a little bit about the success of InnoPhase IoT. Where are you in that sort of? You said you've got investment, and you're sort of relatively sort of early in your life as a company. How good is the traction?
Early as a company, but riding on almost 10 years of R&D that was funded previously as InnoPhase Incorporated. And that's one of the hidden values that's not immediately apparent. You look at InnoPhase IoT as a 2-year-old company, and we're riding on all of that investment that was done then. I think what we have achieved in the sort of the immediate past here is that now we have converted that technology into real products. And I'm sure, as everybody knows, there's a huge difference between innovating and creating technology and actually having products that are sellable and attractive and make a difference in the market. And so that probably is the biggest evolution here over the past 2 years, is that we've actually productized that technology and we are delivering those solutions. And today, at the end of the day, there's been many phases of IoT, right? And I started with perhaps the earlier stages of it when it was just, aside from, enterprise and corporate networks, maybe the first one was everybody connected to the internet using a modem at home on their PC, right? And then you evolved to, wouldn't it be nice to sit in the garden and be able to do the same thing? Well, along came Wi-Fi and you did that. And then it was maybe a few steps in between, but hey, there's this thing called a phone that now also connects, smartphone that connects.
Yeah.
Another degree of increase in ease of use and convenience and then capability and so on. And so really that's now gone on to things, right? And what can you do now when it just expands to things? But think about the world of things, but it's totally wire-free, not just from a connectivity standpoint, but also from power standpoint.
Yeah.
And now you open another whole world. And that's really the inflection point, I think, that we're excited about. And that's what our technology really enables. And so take something like a video doorbell, for example, that might work for 3 to 6 months without changing batteries. Using our technology, we think that you can extend that to about a year. And really, at the end of the day, that's what the user cares about, right? They really don't care about anything else.
Yeah.
Obviously, they care about the video quality and the recording and all of that. But that's the pain point for them is, oh, God, got to go change batteries again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey. You grew up in Sri Lanka, then you ended up at the University of Cambridge, did a PhD in electronics, and then sort of quite an illustrious career in Silicon Valley with quite a few companies acquired by Cirrus Logic, by Broadcom, Microchip. Just tell us about how it all started for you. How did you get into electronics?
Yeah, so I think going back to the formative years, I suppose I was fortunate that I had a environment that I grew up in. Sri Lanka is unique in itself, right? It's really a tropical island, and when I grew up there, paradise island that was largely peaceful and with all the cultural things that come with it. Some people might be more familiar with Hawaii and so on and so forth. But I was immediately surrounded by a family that placed a lot of emphasis on academic excellence and professional excellence and leaving your mark and also helping people. My mother did a lot of work, actually helped to raise money and build the first cancer hospital in the country and so on.
Wow. Okay.
So I was surrounded by that. But within that, I think it's interesting now that you asked the question, reflecting on this, a lot of that going back to even my grandparents, it was classics and then it was law, apart from my two parents who both did science.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But to be frank with you, as I've described myself in various places, I was sports crazy and I still am. And that was my first passion, to be honest. When it comes to things, that academics is focused on, things like history interested me, and I probably could have easily been a lawyer, just like many people in the family. But I was good at math, and so ending up doing digital signal processing, most of that was math and software programming, and that's how I ended up on that path.
But you're from Sri Lanka, you ended up at University of Cambridge.
At Cambridge.
Is that like a Ramanujan type of story where the sort of bright guy goes in and goes to Cambridge?
Well, I think, again, you're going to have to, people ask me this question, that's going to be my grandfather, right? So, I was the first of the third generation when I showed up at Trinity Hall in Cambridge.
Okay, wow, okay.
And the guy who started it all was my granddad. I've seen pictures of him waving goodbye on the ship. In those days, you got on a ship, you went to England, and you didn't come back till you finished.
Exactly.
Followed by his brother, his three sons, and on and on and on. And so I can't make that claim,
Okay.
but I think that's where the family surroundings helped. But a wonderful place. And I always say that another transition I made was, we can talk about it later, I guess, about the transition to the business world. What I always say is that in any of these places, whether it's academic environment, professional environment, yes, there's the subject matter that you're focused on, but there's also a tremendous amount of learning that comes from the environment and just being part of that program. And so what you get exposed to in a place like that and what you pick up, just the richness of the environment, yes, it's high-class stuff, but Nobel Prize winners that you run into, world leaders around, and just the richness of even your own colleagues, right, from just about every country in the world. And at the end of the day, I think a PhD is something, yes, there is again, and I think I did okay. I published 4 papers while I did it and all that. But what it really does is at a very young age, most people are fairly young, in the early 20s when they start, like me. At a very young age, you're given a project to completely devise, run, and manage by yourself. And oh, by the way, you've got to discover something that nobody else has discovered before.
Yeah.
And if you think about
not a small order, not a small task.
Yeah. And really, think about the tremendous training you get just doing that. And some people are fortunate to have advisors and supervisors who help them a lot. And this was
without the internet as well.
Exactly. I mean, think about writing the thesis and what, I don't know what you went through, but what I went through producing that thesis was unimaginable in today's world. I think if I explained that to my kids, they'd be like, really?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just to plot a graph and get that in there, there was none of this stuff available, right? And hours spent doing that. So that's a good point. But I always say that's what really, in my mind, that's the most important thing you get out of it. And then some people happen to discover something that they also want to pursue further and end up using that technology to start companies and so on and so forth. Other people take different parts in their life after that. But for me, that's the reason why when you look at somebody and you say, oh, he's done this, that's a significant part of what somebody like that brings, right?
I mean, the decision to do a topic and you chose electronic or digital signal processing, was that because that interested you, or was it just something that you thought, okay, I need to do something?
I think a little bit of both. I've been frank with you. I wasn't one of the people who sort of felt at a very young age, I had to go build. Like a friend of mine, he always wanted to be an aeronautical engineer from the time he was little. And he always wanted to build planes. And then that's what he's become an expert at. Right? I would say I had varied interests, between the sports, the history. I traveled a lot with my dad, who was a big, decades ahead of his time in environmental stuff and conservation. So, that was something else we did, right? Wildlife and nature, and including being chased by elephants who were not very happy with us being around, putting out forest fires, all that kind of stuff. I would say I always had varied interests. As I said, I was good at math, but in the end of the day, choosing signal processing, and when I graduated, it was sort of flavor of the month.
Yeah,
was really more luck than planned. Right?
That was early 90s. Late 80s.
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s. And people would always ask, and then I went straight into the business side, actually marketing, running DSP products. But people would always ask the question, what's the market for digital signal processing? And it was very tough to explain to them that, hey, it's a technology, it's not a market. Exactly. And of course, today you see it applied just about everywhere, right? Yeah. Every CPU, MCU, AI is all about signal processing and so on. So, but that's sort of how I ended up in it. But the transition to the business side almost immediately, I'm glad I did it, because for me, it's very important to see what difference all of this makes, right? Yeah. And that's the essence of Wiren, I think, on the business side is, people who come to me often and say, look at this wonderful thing we've done. Somebody's integrated all of these different things on a single die and blah, blah, blah. And I always say, okay, well, does anybody care about this? How what difference does it make? Yes, sometimes it does.
Yeah.
And that's what it allowed me to do, was to actually see the benefits of what we were creating. And I also like the outward side of it. The people interaction is more, when you're on the business side, you deal with engineering, but you also deal with the outside world, multiple layers of it. Tend to travel more as well, which is another thing that interests me.
Well, I think your X handle is sports crazy travel enthusiast.
And I have a partner in that, which is my wife, who, by the way, we met at Cambridge. She was also doing a PhD at the same time. and she's the brighter one of the two, clearly.
We
Really knows
always
us.
need to admit that.
Eventually, you realize that's a smart thing to do, and it's in this case, it's true, by the way. So,
Same in my case. But yes, how did you end up? Did you go to PMC-Sierra in the US or from Cambridge, or how did you get that first job?
Yeah, actually, first job, interestingly, was so I went to, in my final year of my doctorate, I actually attended the Signal International Conference on Signal Processing in Japan to present a paper. And talking about being a travel enthusiast, took 2 weeks, took a backpack, went around Japan, stayed only in ryokans and all that kind of stuff. And then actually, I started here in the Bay Area, actually working for NEC.
Okay.
And which was, they were one of the leaders in signal processing, and that's where I got into the business side. And I was quite fortunate, I think, in those first maybe 7 or 8 years of my career. I was very fortunate to work for, I'd say, 4 people who had either, in some cases, already been very successful CEOs of even billion-dollar companies, or very soon thereafter established themselves in those positions. And I think what I learned from those 4, and then some of the leading, VCs and entrepreneurs after that, really was where I learned the most from post academics.
So that was with people like Stream and Cirrus Logic.
Yeah, so name a few. I think PMC-Sierra actually originally was Sierra Semiconductor. We then bought PMC, became PMC-Sierra. There was gentlemen. There was AT&T Microelectronics associated with Bell Labs in the old days that used to lose billions of dollars a year. And Dick was the person who turned around AT&T Micro and then came over as president to PMC-Sierra, and actually was the person who put me in charge of my first business unit.
Okay.
And was a tremendous learning experience working for him, and really proud of some of the things we did there. Eventually, and coincidentally, 2 people that I worked for before ended up sort of working for him at AT&T, and so on and so forth. But what we did there, this is a funny story. The founder of Sierra was Jim Diller, who you might know of. Had been at National and places like that for, I think, a few decades before that.
Right.
And Dick had put me in charge of this business unit. Jim came into my office, talked about something. I don't remember the subject, wrote something on the whiteboard then, walked out. Then he came back in, stuck his head in and said, "Oh, by the way, I guess I should say congratulations, or should I say deepest sympathies? Because that business had shrunk all the way down to, I think it's like $30 million. We had one customer left, one major customer left. And it was in deep trouble. In 18 months, we were running at a $200 million. We had 7 out of the top 10 OEMs in that space, and was a complete turnaround. And I think we just did some amazing things. There was both the sort of the marketing positioning, that part of it, right? We positioned we positioned that connectivity platform as having 7 functions on it, which maybe we had 2 or 3, but nobody was even positioning it that way. So sort of the first multifunction platform that was in a consumer product that could be embedded in consumer PCs and so on. But equally, we did some interesting stuff, just common sense things. We had, because the products had so many issues, for example, we had a whole bunch of bright people out there in the field that would just complain about this, right? And I went to Dick and I said, okay, we've got all these bright guys, and some really bright guys who had worked for, Compaq and places like that before. I said, all of these technical guys, Monday morning, by 12 noon, they can come early if they want to. I need them here in the San Jose office. And Friday, they can fly out at noon or later, right? But they're going to come here. We're going to form tiger teams, and they're all going to be put to work, as opposed to sit around complaining. we did that I don't remember, maybe a few months. I can't remember in detail. But those are some of the things we did, and that's how we turned it around. And our main competitor at the time was Rockwell. They started firing their sales guys, I remember.
Oh,
And really, it had nothing to do with their sales guys. It was that we had outpositioned them. We had changed the playing field, and we never sold for less than Rockwell did. First of all, we didn't need to, but we couldn't afford to either because we didn't have the volume that they had.
yeah.
So anyway, that gives you a flavor of what that was all about. I learned a ton from Dick, but there were three other people prior to that. I worked for Chifun Chan. You might know he was co-CEO with Gart de Gauss at Synopsys for many years, and he started the MIPS line at NEC. And so spent a lot of time with him, traveled with him, picked up a lot of stuff from him. Sohail Khan, who eventually actually became CEO of Agir and then ran companies like Saiji and then PK Dubey, who I think took MMC Networks public, sold it to Cisco for like $4 billion. And all of these guys, they may not remember, they even taught me how to do my taxes when I first came out of grad school. And so what I picked up from those four, I think, was tremendous in those first really 7-8 years I got to work for these guys and with them. Later on, I would say the person that I worked with, Mike Rell, if you know Ray Zinn, and an interesting character, many different opinions about him, but here's a guy who didn't raise a dime in venture funding. Of course, always berated me about that, right? About all my startups and all the money I raised, but took a $300,000 loan against his house and built a company that was valued at $4 to $5 billion, I think, and he owned at least half of it at the time. Talk about a return on investment.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So there was the business side, but one thing I always say about Ray is Ray also had a very personal side to him. And one of the things I really, really appreciated was the environment at Micro was sort of the family environment that he created. And executive staff meetings were always on Friday afternoons, which we hated because everybody liked to go for lunch and sort of ease off on Friday. Started at 1 p.m. But he always ended with a session that was focused outside of work. It was how to be a better person, how to be a kinder person, help people, either in your personal life, professional life, etc. And he always sent you home saying, have a good weekend, enjoy it with your family.
That's good. Yeah.
So the learning experience from those people, especially the ones who had been entrepreneurs themselves, and the accolades you get from these people, right? In this person in particular, I remember that was Stream Machine, where, we were developing at the time, if you wanted to do a video encoder, like C-Cube, right? It was 7 or 14 chips and used in authoring studios, right? And my three co-founders, they're all three whom came from Bell Labs, had 50 patents in video by then. We were building the first single chip video codec. So, I was, so take Umbrella today, but we were, 15 years ahead.
Well, I do remember interacting with them. In late
well,
late
that's
90s.
right. You said that you had a connection there.
Yeah.
And so nobody knew what you could do with this kind of capability, right? And so we were basically,
it was cool,
were saying, hey.
It was cool.
Oh, it was cool. And we said, Hollywood authoring studio in a consumer product. And we talked about all of these things that, people didn't know what a DVD recorder was, right? Apart from somebody in Japan that you went and talked to. And so we had a business plan that talked about time shifting, DVD recorders, digital camcorders, capabilities you can enable through this. I mean, I think this is where connecting the dots and having the vision is important. And in fact, I remember Dado saying to me one day, he said, I see all the business plans that come through. They all come and present to me. And he said, your vision is better than anybody else. the one interesting thing was, and this is where luck or things that you cannot see help, right? That digital camcorder today is really called a smartphone, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't know there was going to be something like a smartphone. And all of those things we talked about are being used by people, but it's on a smartphone.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it'll be the same if you go and talk to the founders of NVIDIA. They would have never known that they could apply their technology in some of the ways they are doing today because some of those things the platforms didn't exist.
Exactly.
But anyway, coming back to the entrepreneurial world, yeah, those learning experiences and getting an accolade from somebody that said, hey, your vision is superior to anybody else I see out there.
That's pretty.
Those
that's a good endorsement.
Kind of thing. Makes your day, maybe makes your a few years.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you. I mean, that's you mentioned all the companies you worked with, and apart from the last one, which is onsemi, because I think you joined them rather than starting them. And
sure.
Through your career, what do you say is your biggest achievement? And I think you've sort of described your early years and so what you learned, but that's what you've learned. What's your achievement? What's your biggest achievement that you feel that you're proud of?
So there are different ones, and they're all special for different reasons, right? But fundamentally, what interests me, in spite of my technical background and PhD in DSP and all of that, is building the business, right? But doing that while you have fun, and not just yourself, but where people feel that it's fun. So even at InnoPhase, I've had people who've joined and come to me very soon afterwards and said, one of the things I really like about this place, Wiren, is it's really fun and people really get along and work together, right? And I think that's a culture that we built, and that's been important. And it's been the case throughout, even going back to PMC-Sierra. I remember once taking one of the marketing guys on a trip with me and my counterpart, the vice president of systems engineering, Victor Godbold, was a crazy guy. And he came back and he said, my God, I haven't laughed so much over 3 days. And we laughed whether we were boarding the flights, whether we had a customer, we had fun all the way through. I think if you looked at what I described earlier at PMC, taking a $30 million business, turning it into $200 million, 7 out of the top 10 OEMs in 18 months, and at the age that I did it, didn't have all the gray hairs I do now. I think that was pretty phenomenal, right?
Yeah,
but everyone is different in the way it was successful, right? The success is slightly different in what you created.
It's quite interesting because all through that until leaving Micrel and Microchip, you were with sort of smaller startup companies,
sure.
And the culture is very different. And I know, having worked with various startups, the culture is more fun when it's a small company,
absolutely.
But when it gets to a large corporate, then that kind of fizzles away. Do you miss that kind of stuff when you went to why did you go to onsemi from doing all of that? Because I guess it was a little bit more established.
So I think, but by the way, you hit a really important point there, right on the head, right? That's the challenge, and that's why you have to admire people like, Jobs and Gates and people like that, is that from that very small company through many, many phases, they were able to keep the intensity and I think the fun of working in those places continue. Otherwise, the companies wouldn't evolve. And that's a very rare quality, right? For people to be able to span through that. I think that's true to a large extent what you say. People say it's fun only because I think primarily, or one reason, is because you don't have to institute some of the processes that are essential for success as a company grows.
Yeah.
The flip side of it is you're not going to be successful unless you put those processes in place, because it isn't 5 guys going out for lunch every day at a Chinese restaurant and talking about what they're doing so everybody knows. Ain't going to happen once you're 200 and 1,000 and beyond. Right?
Yeah.
I have, if you look at my background, it's been an equal balance of the big and the small.
Yeah.
I think different places offer different things. Question about onsemi was, it was an interesting place to go to, but in a lot of ways, the charter I got was fairly unique, right? Here was this largely discrete, largely analog semiconductor DNA company, right? Trying to say we're going to make it in IoT, right? Which is a whole different world offering. And so what I did, and largely, I don't think anybody ever questioned any of the strategy or any of the things we did, because I don't think there were many people who could there, right?
Well, you're the man with vision. You're the man with vision.
So we went ahead, and I have to say that people backed us fully. Yeah. We created this whole thing about platform solutions, and we said, here's where we bring these solutions. And of course, at Stream, you could say we did the same thing. We actually built the whole DVD recorder, even though we only did the chip. We did the companionship, build the whole thing. But at ON, you actually had all these components that went from the sensors to the processors to the DSPs to imaging, et cetera, right? And so we ended up, for example, building a connected camera. And it had our BLE in it, it had our imaging in it, it had various other components in it. But it wasn't just that. It was all of those solutions. We built one platform that could do, I think, 40 different applications for IoT with pluggable modules, right? And all the software firmware and all the connectivity to the cloud. Nobody had ever seen anything like that before. Mm-hmm. So that was the fun of it, right? So that's the fun side of it. There are many reasons for doing things, but, the business side is important. We had a blast building that whole thing. I had somebody in legal once come to me, and it's funny because there was so much excitement about that platform. I would get people requesting that I be part of their 360 reviews because they wanted to be associated with that in areas that had nothing to do with engineering or marketing or sales. And one of the lawyers once, I took this agreement to them. It was about a cloud provider and us doing revenue sharing, right, on their services business. And she said, Viren, why are we doing this? And I sort of looked at her. I didn't quite know how to answer the question. I said, what do you mean? Why are we doing this? I exist here to build businesses, bring revenue, create business for the company. She said, yeah, but we've never done anything like this before. I don't even know how to read this document and give you feedback.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a long answer, but it was the ability to have a really transformative impact on, yes, it was a bigger company, but we pulled together a small team that pretty much worked as a startup within that big company and had a lot of fun doing it.
Entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And eventually, of course, that became a systems group with over 100 people and hiring the executives to run that and all that. But that was that. Micrel, I wouldn't say ever left its, because of Ray, I don't think it ever left its startup roots.
Okay.
It had that, at least culture in the businesses I was involved in, yeah. Okay. And of course, the big one there was driving automotive Ethernet. Not many people know this. Micrel started automotive Ethernet and the connected car in that sense, yeah. And we started with diagnostics, which was the easy one, then moved into infotainment, and then into instrument clusters and so on. And out of that came this whole thing about the connected car. I'll tell you a funny story. One of my last, I may have even announced the acquisition by Microchip by then. Last conference, I think it was Shanghai in China. And everybody was there, right? There was the chip guys, there was the software guys, there was the service providers, the car manufacturers, obviously, and so on. This is a funny story. And when you're that deep into this, you see things other people don't, right? Like autonomous driving, I used to always say, ain't gonna happen, my God, in its full, in the full sense.
Yes.
Not gonna happen until 2050, right? So anyway, I'm up there presenting, and we get this question. when do you think autonomous driving will happen? So we were sharing the questions. We said, let's give it to the person, I don't remember his name, but he ran the autonomous driving lab for Toyota.
Yeah.
And we said, why don't you answer this question? And he stands up and he says, I will be dead by then. And the whole place just erupts in laughter. But what people didn't realize is we didn't know whether he meant that it's going to take so long that he's going to be dead, or because of all the trials and his involvement in that, whether he would be dead because somebody has knocked him down and killed him, right? And nobody bothered to ask a follow-up question. But but that was the answer that came out. He says, I will be dead by then.
Yeah, it was even then an ambiguous answer. So
ambiguous answer, but we all know that the benefits of assisted driving is huge, right?
Yes,
we don't need to get to full autonomous. Full autonomous has its own implications. But that was another really fun thing we were involved with is working primarily with BMW, but then the 5 European manufacturers, and today every time I run into Ganesh, who now runs Microchip, not Steve, but says, "Oh, your businesses are doing wonderfully well for us." I'm sure it's over $1 billion or something.
Oh yeah, it's nice to have all of those accolades. So. Tell me a little bit about what excites you about life, the industry. What sort of gets you up every day, apart from InnoPhase IoT?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like, as I said, I like to see what the technology and the solutions actually do, but in the sense that if they can improve people's lives, and there are many aspects to that, that is something that excites me, and I hope I can spend even more time doing that than I have done so far, right, in my life. I mentioned, that some of that comes from my mother. I think it's passed on to us. I have one of my kids particularly spends a lot of time. In fact, her sister used to say, I don't know how she's doing a degree at Berkeley, because she literally used to run a shelter. While she was doing that, there was a program to do that. So that side of me is very important, helping other people and improving people's lives, right? That's a huge part of it. The rest of it is, I told you about things that I like doing, of course, but I don't know if that helps people, watching sports.
So yes, I mean, the passion is sport, any sport, cricket as well. And I think, you went to Australia to watch the Open, the tennis.
Yeah.
I think you said you played cricket in Sri Lanka with some of the people who played on the national team as well.
Yeah. That is mine and several of our friends. Our claim to fame is, Sri Lanka never, if you're familiar with cricket, there's about 7 or 8 countries that play in the top tier, and they're recognized as test playing nations. And when I was growing up, Sri Lanka wasn't part of that group. And my generation, I believe, was the first to get Sri Lanka elevated to being a test-playing nation. And our claim to fame is that we played with 3 guys and Sri Lanka also didn't have much of an infrastructure for cricket. So there was a lot of young kids who were playing for Sri Lanka very early, right? And so these 3 guys, if I remember right, they were between the ages of 17 and 19 when they started playing for Sri Lanka. And they became international stars. And then so our claim to fame was, hey, my teammates, international sports stars. But obviously I wasn't as talented, or maybe I didn't have the work ethic. You need a tremendous work ethic in sports, by the way, to be successful. But that's my claim to fame. But it's never died down. I still come back to your part of the world. I have a good friend of mine who secures the tickets for various, World Cup 2019. I was there for a few games.
Right.
So we still come back there. Tennis is a game that I can watch together with my wife. She won't come for cricket, but she'll come for tennis.
Right. Well, I think my son is like you. He's pretty much into every sport. And,
good man.
So day and night. We need to bring this to a close. I was going to ask you,
Sure.
what Yeah, what would you give as advice to young Viren or to youngsters who want to sort of achieve some of the things you've done in your life, and what have you learned that people can learn from?
Sure. So one would be patience, right? Tough to teach, especially somebody at a younger age, but patience is a tremendous virtue, and give it time. Sometimes, especially when you're young, yes, you have the right idea, you know it's the right thing to do, and you're frustrated by why it's taking too long to get something done. If you can try to be patient, and you will find that that pays off. In terms of, I think also values are an important thing, and whether it's business, your personal life, in any aspect of your life, have those values, stick to them, never give up on those. Because once you give up on the values, it's very difficult. And if you don't, it's just like when you build relationships, whether it's again in personally or in professional life, trust is huge, right? And trust is a two-way street. I often tell people, if you don't trust somebody, that person can feel it. You may not think the person doesn't know it, but if you don't trust the person, that person knows it. In turn, they don't trust you.
Yeah,
you will find it very difficult. So, but coming back, values are very important. I think in terms of business, one is whether it's big or small, especially if you're building a new business, technology is great, innovation is great. The most important thing is market.
Yeah.
Especially as a small company, there's very little you can do about creating the market. So it's very important to identify that you have a market. Then comes vision, right? You have to have that vision. I can tell you many stories, including how Shutterfly evolved, and how we saw that 10 years before that. But vision is important, and vision might take those 10 years. I don't think we have time. Otherwise, I'd tell you my Shutterfly story.
Maybe another show.
Yeah, another show. And then it's leadership, right? And at the end of the day, whether it's leadership, running a business, all of that, I think, condenses down to a simple thing, and that's common sense.
Common sense, yeah. Okay.
A lot of it is common sense. You don't have to go to business school to learn this stuff. You don't have to get trained by 100 people on this stuff. Go with common sense, and common sense. And something else that goes with that is going with your gut. You can analyze to the depth, feels right, very often go with it. But at the end of the day, if you want to build, then leadership is the important thing. And there you have to be genuine in your, aside from all the rest of it on the business side, you had to be genuine in your values and what you stand for and project and so on. So, yeah.
Well, Viren, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.